We are now on the record. My name is Michael Newell. I'm a videographer for Golco Litigation Services. Today's date is December 19th, 2018. The time is 9:36 a.m. This video deposition is being held in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the matter of national prescription opiate litigation. The deponent today is Floyd Ratliff. Counsel will be noted for the stenographic record. The court reporter is Julian Zychek and will now swear in the witness.
Would you raise your right hand, sir, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to hear will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you?
I do.
Thank you.
Dean Kawamoto, Keller Rohrbach, on behalf of the plaintiffs.
Good morning, David Coe, Keller Rohrbach, also on behalf of the plaintiffs.
Tricia Hirschfeld, Branson, Strange and Jennings, on behalf of the Tennessee plaintiffs.
Emily Cavassalis, Covington and Burling for McKesson. Laura Jane Durfee, Jones Day for Walmart.
Don Lohman, in-house at Mallinckrodt.
Alyssa Reedy, Ropes and Gray for Mallinckrodt LLC and Spec GX.
Andrew O'Connor of Ropes and Gray, Mallinckrodt LLC, Spec GX, and Floyd Ratliff.
Do you want any of the telephonic appearances? Or okay. Good morning, Mr. Ratliff. Thank
Good
you
morning.
for being here. Have you ever been deposed before?
Yes.
And can you briefly describe the matter you were deposed in?
It was a matter when I was with the FBI. It was at the U.S. Department of Justice. It concerned an investigation. I was one of the writers for the final report.
And did this case involve, or did this matter involve narcotics?
It did not.
So, well, how long ago was that?
Approximately 1996.
Okay, so some time ago. In terms of the rules for the deposition then, sort of just to help things go more smoothly, it's very important for us to not speak over each other. If I ask a question and you don't understand what the question is, please let me know and I'll do my best to rephrase it. When you answer, you need to answer audibly, so nodding your head isn't going to work. And if you want to take a break, let me know. If there's a question pending, I think it probably makes sense for you to answer the question, but then we'll accommodate whatever breaks you need. Does that sound agreeable?
Understood.
Okay. So with respect to this deposition, well, actually, let me take a step back. You used to work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Have you ever testified in court before?
Many times.
Okay. And can you generally describe the cases that you testified in?
I testified in all matters that were investigated by the FBI. I was a special agent for approximately 14 and a half years, where I investigated cases. And those cases involved bank robberies and extortions, drug cases. I was cross-trained with DEA in the early 80s.
And for the drug cases, did any of them involve prescription opioids?
No.
Now, you indicated that you cross-trained with the DEA. What do you mean by that?
In this is going back a long way, 81, 82, 83, the FBI received joint jurisdiction with the Drug Enforcement Administration to assist them with the overwhelming drug crisis in the United States at that time. So the FBI selected certain agents to be trained to assist the DEA or to work their own cases within the FBI, but in coordination with the DEA.
So you're familiar with the Controlled Substances Act?
I am.
Yeah. With respect to this deposition, how did you prepare for it?
I spoke with counsel from Ropes and Gray.
And do you recall roughly how many times you spoke with counsel?
2 times.
And were those in-person meetings or
They were.
telephonic?
I'm sorry. They were.
And roughly when did these meetings occur?
One was yesterday, and one was several months back.
And how long did these meetings last? Approximately.
4 or 5 hours?
So 4 or 5 hours per meeting?
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you a question about documents. I'm not asking you to describe the documents. I'm not asking you to describe the substance of the documents for me, but why don't we start with, did you review any documents during these meetings?
Yes.
And did any of these documents refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Do you know if these documents have been produced in this case?
No.
And so I'll make a general request of counsel to provide any documents that he reviewed.
And I can say for the record, they've all been produced.
Do you have any documents in your personal possession relating to your work at Mallinckrodt?
No.
Did you have a company phone?
I did.
Did you ever send any text messages related to your work at Mallinckrodt?
I'm not certain that I did. I'm not very technical as far as I know I carried a BlackBerry. Is that a text?
I think they're somewhat different, but I take it from your answer you are not a heavy texter.
Correct.
Fair enough. During your time at Mallinckrodt, were you ever interviewed by any regulators or law enforcement personnel?
I spoke with law enforcement personnel often, but I was never interviewed in that sense.
And you've never been deposed while employed by Mallinckrodt?
I have not.
And how long did you work for Mallinckrodt for?
Approximately was September of 2000 until June of 2012.
And what did you do after you left your job at Mallinckrodt?
Played golf.
Now, prior to joining Mallinckrodt, you were with the FBI?
That's correct.
And what was your position with them right before you joined Mallinckrodt?
I retired. I was special agent in charge of the FBI in Albany, New York. We covered Vermont, all counties out to the Finger Lakes, and just north of New York City was our territory.
Did you ever work for the National Drug Intelligence Center?
I did.
And when was that from?
I'm trying to associate this with other movement in my career to give you an accurate date.
Sure.
I would say 1996 and 1997.
And what position did you hold with them?
I was the deputy director.
And what were your job responsibilities as deputy director?
It was basically to manage the entire operation. It was a director, but those specific duties fall to the deputy director.
Are you familiar with the National Drug Threat Assessment?
I've heard that term, but I've been retired for 6.5 years, and I seldom think about any of this. So, and that would have been in the 1990s, 20 years ago. So I'm not certain how to answer the question other than I believe I've heard that term.
What was the job, or what was the function of the National Drug Intelligence Center?
We employed our own analysts, and analysts from the FBI, the DEA, and most government agencies with, I like to describe it with 3 initials. We were funded through the Department of Justice and also through the Central Intelligence Agency. And our job was to gather information from agencies that didn't have specific drug law enforcement type of jurisdiction. So, for instance, the Coast Guard might do an interdiction, and they might have a lot of information that never gets to the Drug Enforcement Administration or to the FBI or to the proper agency. So the National Drug Intelligence Center employed all of these different agencies so we could coordinate that information, make reports, and put it back out to the agencies that would most benefit from that information.
And is it your understanding that one of the functions of the National Drug Intelligence Center was to put out this report entitled the National Drug Threat Assessment?
I'm certain that's where I heard that term, but it's been many years.
Do you recall ever working on a drug threat assessment for the NDIC?
Not personally.
Would you agree that there is an opioid crisis facing this country?
I would.
And roughly when did it start?
I don't recall the exact timing.
If you had to estimate, though, what roughly when would you put the date? Pre-2000, 2012, if you had to ballpark it?
I would rather not guess.
Were you concerned about the opioid epidemic while you were employed at Mallinckrodt?
Yes.
And you joined Mallinckrodt in 2000.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever hear the term opioid epidemic used or discussed while you were employed at Mallinckrodt?
Yes. What you need to understand, if I might add some additional information, I worked as the security manager for Mallinckrodt until they were purchased by Tyco International. Then it became Tyco Healthcare. Then I became the director of security, director, not manager, but director of security for Tyco Healthcare. That eventually was spun off into Covidien, and I was a chief security officer for Covidien worldwide.
And so it was in the context of your work as the director of security for Tyco that you heard this term, or you used this term, or I'm sorry, you heard this term discussed?
Objection. I just can't recall exactly when I heard the term. Did I hear that term? Yes.
And what are the causes of this opioid crisis?
It would be abuse of narcotics.
Would you agree that overprescription by doctors is a cause?
Yes.
Would you agree that the over-distribution by pharmacies is a cause?
Objection. Yes.
Do you know what a pill mill is?
I do.
What is it?
It's one that produces an excess of narcotics for the street.
And when you say produces an excess of narcotics for the street, are you referring to a manufacturer of narcotics?
No.
So what do you mean when you say a pill mill produces an excess of narcotics for the street?
A manufacturer receives quota from the Drug Enforcement Administration. They have an overview of what pain medications are needed to be distributed through distributors throughout the United States. They have the big picture. The manufacturers only have a small portion of the picture because they're granted quota, normally not the entire amount they request, but they're granted a certain amount of quota by the Drug Enforcement Administration.
By the way, I believe everyone's real time is down.
You want to take a quick 10-second break?
We're going off the record at 9:52.
Okay.
We're back on the record at 9:55.
So, Mr. Ratliff, before we went off the record, we were discussing pill mills. Are pill mills essentially pharmacies?
Objection.
There's no way for me to answer that. I don't know that.
Okay. Well, what I think we've established that, in your view, a pill mill is not a manufacturer. So what is a pill mill?
They're putting illicit pills into the illicit market.
And can you give me an example of a pill mill?
Well, there are countries, Mexico would be one, China would be another, that introduce pills into the United States at a large rate. So those would be pill mills.
And so your understanding of the term pill mill is that it would include China, for example?
Yes.
Could a local retail pharmacy be a pill mill?
Yes.
Objection.
Did you ever encounter such pill mills while working for Mallinckrodt?
I did.
Do you believe pill mills contributed to the opioid crisis?
I do.
And were you concerned about them while you were employed at Mallinckrodt?
Yes.
And did you believe it was, strike that, do you believe Mallinckrodt had an obligation to prevent its products from reaching pill mills?
Objection.
Yes.
And do you recall when you first became concerned about pill mills?
I can't give you a specific date or year. There was a lot of information on the news about the illicit, not licit, but illicit distribution of narcotics, and that it was causing deaths from that illicit product that was in the market.
And by illicit distribution of narcotics, does that include prescription opioids?
Objection.
Yes.
In fact, weren't the majority of illicit narcotics that were being distributed prescription opioids?
Objection.
I don't know that.
I'd like to mark as exhibit, do you have the 2011 drug crisis? Okay. So this is going to be marked as exhibit 1. And not quite sure what the best way to get this to the other side of the table is. So if I give it to you, can you sort of circulate it? Okay.
Can I get one?
So, Mr. Ratliff, I've handed you what's Exhibit 1. It's an excerpt from the National Drug Threat Assessment from 2011, and I've put it up on the Elmo for your convenience.
Okay.
You'll note that it's put out by the U.S. Department of Justice, and it's the National Drug Intelligence Center. It's actually the institution that's responsible for it. Directing your attention to the top of page 37, and I'll highlight this wording for you. Can you please read what I've just highlighted?
The abuse of CPDs constitutes a problem second only to the abuse of marijuana in scope and pervasiveness in the United States. The problem is particularly acute among adolescents.
Would you agree with that statement?
Objection. Based on their assessment, yes.
Well, do you have any reason to believe that the assessment is inaccurate?
No.
That's all with that one.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Oh, no, that's fine. So is it fair to say that the opioid crisis is largely driven by prescription opioids?
Objection. I would say yes.
Are you aware of the term migration with respect to, strike that. Are you familiar with the use of the term migration in the context of opioid products?
No. Not that I recall.
Did you have particular concerns with opioid products going to Florida and from there making their way to other parts of the country?
Objection. Yes.
What were those concerns?
There came a time that we began to look at our customer's customer. We manufactured oxycodone. We sold that to distributors. Then distributors sold that to their customers. And there came a time when we started looking at our customer's customer. So I actually went to Florida and reviewed a number of pharmacies to see if they were legitimate pharmacies, in my opinion, or if they were, I guess, what you would call a pill mill.
And why go to Florida to do that?
Because that was, I think, according to DEA, one of the hot spots. There were others in the United States that we also looked at, but Florida was one that DEA was particularly concerned about.
And do you recall what some of the other hot spots were?
I do. New Jersey would be one. Las Vegas, Nevada would be another, as an example.
What about Kentucky?
I'm certain we've discussed Kentucky in those terms.
And what about West Virginia?
I'm not certain if that was a term we used or a state we looked at while I was still employed, but I know they've had a great deal of problems.
So it'd be fair to characterize West Virginia as a hot spot as we're using that term, would it not?
Objection. Yes.
What about Georgia?
I don't know specifically that Georgia was a hot spot.
What about Tennessee?
Just for the record, I've been retired 6.5 years, and most of the information you're asking is much longer ago than that, and I'll do my very best, but I haven't really thought about any of this since I retired, so I'm going to do my very best to answer those questions. But you're asking questions about long ago for me.
No, I understand that, and I appreciate your best efforts.
I'm doing the best I can. So,
thank you.
At the time, there were a number of states that were having issues, I believe. But Florida was where DEA really wanted us to focus our efforts at that time.
And in just going back briefly to the issue of hotspots, do you recall conversations about Tennessee?
Objection.
Not specifically,
What about Ohio?
not specifically.
Now, with respect to Florida, what were your concerns about Florida?
We were getting information that a number of the pharmacies, these would be the customers of our customer, were purchasing large amounts of oxycodone 30s, 30 milligram tablets.
And was the concern that these products were essentially being diverted?
Objection.
We didn't know that at the time. The effort was to go and obtain additional information so we could make an assessment of those pharmacies. You know, one, for example, may be next to a Veterans Administration hospital, and maybe they had a reason for purchasing large amounts. Others may be putting them back into the illicit market. So we needed additional information to make an assessment whether or not that we would continue to supply our distributor. The distributor had a responsibility to know their customers. They have the same exact responsibility that a manufacturer has to develop a program to prevent diversion. So they're supposed to have security people just like myself that would go to those pharmacies and review them. So to obtain additional information, I went to Florida and I obtained cooperation from two of our forensic auditors from Covidian that didn't work for Mallinckrodt to go to the east side of the state. They were both fluent in Spanish to review these high dosage pharmacies to see were they good solid pharmacies or were they very small pharmacies with no other products on their shelves and in signs that indicated Mallinckrodt products sold for cash only. So we went to Florida and we made that review, and then we made recommendations not only to DEA that we were not going to provide product to our distributors to go to those, but that they should also review our results because we, stopped selling to our distributor. And the distributor's responsibility then was to go to that pharmacy and make an assessment also. And if they had information that we didn't have, they could always come forward.
And you indicated that you went to Florida to make an assessment of these pharmacies and essentially determine if they were pill mills or not. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And what were the results of that assessment? Did you identify pill mills in Florida?
I did.
In your opinion, were there a higher number of pill mills in Florida than, strike that. Based on your experience and in your opinion, were there a higher number of pill mills in Florida than in other states?
Objection.
I would have no way to assess that.
Would it be fair to say you identified a large number of pill mills in Florida?
Objection.
I would say yes.
And would you agree that the pills that ended up with these pill mills in Florida, strike that. The pills that went to these pill mills in Florida didn't always stay in Florida, did they?
Objection.
I'd have no way to know that.
Do you recall ever being informed or contacted by law enforcement in other states indicating that they had possession of Mallinckrodt product from the illicit market, and it appears that that product came from Florida?
I believe that we received information from Tennessee. They requested assistance on identifying the actual numbers that are contained on the bottles, and that we provided that information. And it's been a long time ago, and I believe that was the case.
So that would be an example of pills traveling from Florida to Tennessee in the illicit market. Is that fair?
Fair.
And there's nothing to prevent a pill that originally is shipped to Florida from being transported to Kentucky, is there?
No?
And were you aware that there were people coming into Florida from out of state for the express purpose of obtaining opioid products?
Objection.
DEA, I spoke with DEA frequently, Pete Kleisel, and that information would have been gleaned from conversations with Pete.
And so DEA indicated to you that they were concerned that people were coming from out of state into Florida to obtain opioid products.
That's
Objection.
correct. And we also provided, there's no oxy in the tablet. They're placebos, would be the term, to law enforcement, DEA, so they could have an undercover operation in Florida. So we did know about that, and they couldn't redistribute product that they took in without the Attorney General personally approving that. So we provided placebos to them to assist them with their investigation.
And do you know where those placebos ultimately ended up? Do you know if they stayed in Florida or if they were distributed up and down the eastern seaboard?
Objection.
They were, well, I don't know specifically where they ended up. DEA requests assistance, but they never come back and say, these are the results of your assistance.
Two, 6, 9, 8, 8, 4.
Try it this way.
Okay. So I'd like to mark this as Exhibit 2 if I could. So, Mr. Ratliff, I've handed you an exhibit. It's Bates numbered MNK T1 269884. It's at the very bottom. And could you review that exhibit and let me know when you're ready?
Okay.
So this is an email that you sent to Karen Harper on March 22nd, 2011. Do you recall sending this email?
Not particularly, but I sent it because it's got my name from and to Karen. And I remember basically what the email says, because they came to Mallinckrodt, to my office on occasion, asking for assistance in how to investigate the pharmacies. And so we gave them whatever we could in assistance. So,
And H.D. Smith was a Mallinckrodt customer?
yes.
Now, do you see on the email where it says H.D. Smith has suspended all sales of Oxy 30s into Florida for the immediate future?
Correct.
Do you have an understanding of why they did that?
The owner, I mean, this is from, you have to remember how many years ago this has been. I'm going to give you my best recollection of that conversation.
That would be appreciated.
So the owner said, there are problems in Florida. You guys go down there and see what's going on. And so he said, and stop the sales until we figure it out.
And when you say the owner said you guys go down there, was he referring to his people or was he referring to Mallinckrodt, or both?
He had no authority over us. He was talking about his people.
Okay. And you see further on the email, it says he went on to explain, as he told us, that they do not sell to pain management clinics.
Okay.
Do you understand what the concern was with pain management clinics?
Objection. Pain management clinics we produced or manufactured oxycodone 5s, 15s, and 30s. The pain management clinics tended to prescribe the oxycodone 30s, which is the highest dose at that time that we manufactured. So there's no way for us to know if they're treating legitimate pain from their customers. But I mean, that's certainly an issue because of the volume that they were selling.
And so you had a concern that the pain management clinics may have been overprescribing. Is that fair?
Objection.
I don't know that I knew that at the time, but they were purchasing large amounts from their customers. Let me restate this. Our customers, the distributors, were selling to these pharmacies, and that the doctors were writing scripts to those pharmacies for their patients. So it was far removed from us. So for me to tell you today that I knew specifically this was going on, there's no way I could do that.
Well, I understand that, but this email indicates that you had, well, this email indicates that the distributor had a concern with pain management clinics. And it sounds like you shared that concern. Is that fair?
Objection.
I'm trying to see where I agreed.
Well, let me rephrase the question. Did you, while employed at Mallinckrodt, did you share a concern regarding pain management clinics and the prescription of Oxy 30s?
Objection.
At a point when we started to review our customers' customers.
And at the very bottom of the email, do you see the sentence that says, he concluded that if the pharmacies were filling too many scripts for pain management doctors or were uncooperative, that they would no longer sell to that pharmacy?
Yes.
Did you agree with that conclusion?
That was their conclusion. I was reporting what they were telling me.
But do you think that conclusion was a reasonable one for them to be making?
As I previously stated, at the time, I hadn't had an opportunity to review our customers' customers, and then the downstream with the pharmacies and their patients. So to say, I don't see anywhere in here in this email that I agree with that. You know, did we have a concern? I think it was on the news about pain management clinics, and so I didn't live in a bubble. So there's certainly, you know, if you believe the news, that there was a problem with pain management doctors.
And when you completed your review of your customers' customers, that confirmed that there was a problem with pain management doctors. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Objection.
Sorry.
Do you recall when you first started reviewing your customers' customers?
I would be guessing if I said a specific time. I hate to guess.
What prompted you to start looking at your customers' customers?
DEA was concerned that they wanted everyone to be involved in the suspicious order monitoring program specifically, and to delve into their customer's customer. That came out of a conference that DEA held. If I were guessing, I would say 2009. It may have been a different time. I just don't want to misspeak.
No, I understand that, sir.
I'm trying to give you the best, and it's been a long time.
Now, Your customers, the distributors, were also supposed to be vetting their customers. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Objection.
Did you ever have concerns with the vetting process that your customers were using to vet their customers?
Objective one.
You can answer.
Yes.
The objection is preserved for the record.
Yes.
And can you describe those concerns?
Objective one.
We weren't sure that they were going to their customers and doing an audit. So we came up with a form that required a lot of information from those pharmacies that purchased large amounts of our products. And there were a number of questions on there that would help us. It would give us more information, additional information. And it would allow us to make an assessment then too of the distributor if they were following up with those pharmacies, if there were any concerns.
And do you recall any of the strike that? Do you recall any of the distributors that you had concerns about?
Objective
Objection.
one.
Our job was to ensure our customers were in compliance. So if we had concerns about one of their customers or more than one of their customers, we would bring that to their attention. And it was the intent that they understood exactly what we expected as a manufacturer.
And do you recall any specific distributors, though, that you had concerns about their compliance?
Objection.
Do any names stand out for you?
Objection.
There was one that was dilatory. We gave them specific deadlines, like 30 days. Provide this information back to Mallinckrodt so we could make an assessment in 30 days. They didn't always make those deadlines. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were out of compliance or had ill intent. It meant that they didn't provide the information. So we would have to go back to them and say, we need this information to make an assessment. On
And
one occasion, we brought that to the management of that distributor's attention. And they, to the best of my knowledge, fixed the matter right away.
And what distributor was this that we're talking about?
AmerisourceBergen.
Do you recall a distributor named Sunrise?
Yes.
And what do you recall about that distributor?
That they had hired a DEA either agent or compliance analyst to assist them with their entry into the market. And at some point, our people, not myself, went to Sunrise to review the operation and make a determination if they were a legitimate enterprise.
And do you recall that Sunrise voluntarily surrendered its license to the DEA?
Objection.
I don't recall that specifically, but I believe that's correct.
Do you recall anything about Masters Pharmaceuticals?
Objection.
I know that I was involved in an audit of Masters.
And what do you recall about that audit?
Almost nothing. It's been so long ago, and what happens is that the different audits, they just kind of all meld together. And at my age, I'm having more difficulty remembering things that are 10 years old or longer. So,
Do you know if Masters had its license revoked by the DEA?
I believe that to be the case. I know we sent information to DEA after the audit. I do remember that. But we had two audits within a day or so of each of those audits, and that's why I'm somewhat confused if it's Masters or one of the other distributors.
And do you recall what information you sent to DEA about Masters Pharmaceuticals?
No.
What about Harvard? Do you recall them as a distributor?
I never have been to Harvard. I've heard that name, but that's all I know.
And what about KeySource?
Objection.
I think KeySource, again, I'm almost guessing, but I believe it's in Cincinnati and was one of the ones that we audited during that 2-day period.
And do you recall if they lost their license to the DEA for Schedule II narcotics?
Again, I'd be guessing, I don't know, but I believe they may have. This has been, long ago.
Now, you indicated that you were the security director for Mallinckrodt. Is that right?
I was the security manager for Mallinckrodt. I was the security director when it became Tyco Healthcare.
And so, were you promoted into that position?
I was.
And roughly, when did you become the security director for Tyco? And I understand that this happened a while ago, so
I'm trying to remember.
I understand
It's
the date is
difficult.
not exact.
I would say sometime in 2001. And I may be wrong. I may be off a year. I think it's
Sure, but the early 2000s.
Yes,
sounds
that'd
right.
be fair.
What were your responsibilities as security director for Mallinckrodt? I'm sorry, what were your responsibilities as security director for Tyco?
We had facilities all over. We were responsible for the pharmaceutical section, for surgical instruments, for surgical materials. It's not a good way to say that. It's surgical supplies. And there was additionally one other division that had to do with breathing apparatus for people that needed oxygen. That was sold off fairly early. So we maintained those 3 divisions until Covidian spun off from Tyco International.
And with respect to opioid products, what were your responsibilities for the opioid products?
To prevent diversion, to ensure that in the manufacturing sites that there were programs in place.
And could you define diversion for me? What's your understanding of that term?
Diversion is taking a licit product, a legitimate product, and taking it away in an illicit way for one's own personal use or for sale.
So would the overprescription by a doctor constitute diversion in your opinion?
Objection. There's no way for me to, without additional information about a specific doctor, to make that generalization.
But if a doctor is prescribing opioids for non-medically valid reasons, that would be an example of diversion.
That's a hypothetical, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I could answer that without specifics.
Well, what specifics would you need?
I need to know what type of patients he sees, and does he write the same script, 90 tablets of 30 milligram for every patient he sees? Now, would that be something that I would want to know? Yes. So if that's the case, but still without additional information, it's really difficult for me to make that assessment.
But in the example you gave, the 90 tablets of 30 of Oxy 30 for every patient he sees, in your view, that would be an example of diversion?
Now, it would be suspicious, but I can't make the assessment literally without having specifics about his customers. Would it be suspicious? Yes,
So it could be diversion.
it's possible.
And the pill mills, the distribution of Mallinckrodt products by pill mills, that would be another example of diversion, would it not?
Objection. It would.
And so when you say one of your responsibilities was to prevent diversion,
Mhm.
it was to prevent the pill mills from getting your product. Is that
Objection.
fair?
No, not fair. We're the manufacturer. The distributor has a responsibility to know who their customers are and where those pills are going. So do we have a responsibility to monitor our distributors? Yes. And we were auditing those distributors, just as you've discussed with Masters and the other one that you said. So we were monitoring those people to make a determination if they were doing due diligence on their employees. But you can't take that information and bring it all the way back to the manufacturer. You have to go back through DEA and the quota that they allot to each of the manufacturers. We were not, by any stretch, the only manufacturer of Oxy. There's Oxycontin, Oxycodone, other products manufactured. So you're trying to make a leap that's not necessarily, in my opinion, appropriate.
But you had a responsibility to know your customers' customers, did you not?
Objection.
At a certain point in time, we were told we should know our customer's customer. And that came secondhand out of a meeting in DEA. At that time, we didn't know how we would even make that determination, how we would even determine who our customers' customers were. And at some point, we developed information that we had a system called chargebacks. And if you want me to explain it, I can't. But I know that we had a system, so we had information on our distributors' customers. Once we had that information, that's when we started with the forms, sending those out to the distributors, trying to determine if they had done due diligence with all of their customers. They weren't our customers, they were our customers' customers. So we didn't have that responsibility from ad infinitum. It was at a certain point. Let me just say one other thing. We asked DEA for assistance time and time again. They were silent. They said, it's your responsibility. Yeah, but could you just give us a hint about what you would like to see? And they just couldn't seem to come up with anything. They said it's not their responsibility. To me, it is their responsibility. They're the regulatory agency, and they're trying to say, no, this is all all of the registrants' issues. And they should have been at least somewhat helpful, and they weren't.
But at some point in time, they did indicate to you that you should know your customer's customer, correct?
Exactly. Yes, they did.
And at that point, would you agree that you had an obligation to know your customer's customer?
Objection.
At that time, we started identifying our customers' customers.
Because DEA indicated that you had that responsibility, yes?
They didn't ever say, you have that responsibility. It came from a conference in DC with the compliance group, and that term at some point came up. And so it drifted back through the grapevine, for lack of a better way to say it, that they were talking about having their registrants know their customer's customer. And basically at that time, we had never heard that term. DEA had never come to us personally and said, you need to know your customer's customer. So, and by the time DEA actually told us that, it was late in 2011. It was the same date they had the earthquake in Washington, D.C., and we felt it because they said, you need to know your customer's customer. And the very next week, I was on a plane to Florida because they said, you need to do this. That was really the first time they ever told us that we needed to do that. We had a good program. We did the very best we could to prevent diversion, And once they said, you need to do this, we did it. We did it immediately. And furthermore, not only did we do that, we started canceling a lot of these. We were going back to our distributors and telling them, we're not going to sell products to you that you sell to these particular pharmacies. And so it worked.
So you indicated that, I think you just said we were going back to our distributors and telling them we are not going to sell products to you that you sell to these particular pharmacies.
That's correct.
Objection.
So shouldn't the distributors have done that on their own?
Objection.
Yeah. Yes.
And do you recall how many distributors you went to tell them we're no longer going to essentially, well, strike that. Do you recall how many distributors you went to and told them you need to cut off these customers?
We took the top three, McKesson, Cardinal, and AmerisourceBergen, and we looked at their top 10 pharmacies in Florida. So there were a total of 30 pharmacies. They were the ones that purchased the most of the oxycodone 30s through their distributors. And so when we identified those, and as I said, when DEA told us that, the very next week I was in Florida. And I had caused two of our forensic auditors to cover the east side of the state because they had Spanish-speaking ability, and I covered the west side of the state. And I went into a number of these pharmacies to try to determine exactly what DEA had said, know your customer's customer. In fact, I testified in Fort Myers, Florida, on behalf of DEA against one of those pharmacies because we felt very strongly that they were selling products they shouldn't have.
And do you recall what the case was that you testified on behalf of the DEA in?
Gulf Coast Pharmacy, I believe. That's been a long time also.
And you say you visited a total of 30 pharmacies, is that right?
Objection.
Not
That's your
personally.
recollection. But you and there are
Two
two other forensic auditors
From Covidian, not from Mallinckrodt, but from the corporation.
Okay.
They did the others. I can't recall exactly what the separation was, but we covered all of those 30 pharmacies.
And with respect to those 30 pharmacies, do you have a rough estimate for how many you decided should not be receiving Mallinckrodt products?
I don't know. Some of them were absolutely legitimate pharmacies. You walk in and they look like a Walgreens, and they have all the products out there. You talk to the pharmacist, and she's very aware of issues in Florida, and you know, they would tell me what they were doing to prevent. They looked at the scripts written by the doctors to make sure that they were consistent, and sometimes they would contact the doctors. Others were literally pill mills where they had to buzz you into the door, and they had stanchions, and they had a sign, Mallinckrodt, cash only. To me, that's a pill mill.
Is it fair to say it's not that difficult to identify a pill mill if someone has your experience?
I don't think that's fair. There are so many variables. You know, for me, you know, I spent years in law enforcement. I can look at a situation much differently than one that's never been in law enforcement. I mean, I look at the people that are in and around the pharmacy, and do they look like they're legitimate paying patients, or, you know, are there some elderly people on walkers? Are there? You just need information to be able to make that assessment. You can't make a blanket assessment, especially without in my opinion, a law enforcement background.
And so when you visit a pharmacy to evaluate whether it's a pill mill or not, can you list for me the things that you look for?
One of the things you look for, like I stated before, is you have to be buzzed into the pharmacy. So they look at you, they have to push a buzzer to let you in. Very little product on the shelf. A sign such as Mallinckrodt products, left side, cash only, no insurance.
And these would all be indicators that it's a pill mill.
Absolutely.
And what else?
No product on the shelf. Strictly filling prescriptions in large numbers of Oxy 30 going into that and being prescribed. So that's certainly information that you would want more. To make a proper assessment, you need as much information as possible. But those are things that I would look for when trying to make an assessment.
Do you also look at the clientele of the pill mill?
No, there's no way to do that.
But you can see who's going in and out of the pharmacy.
I can, physically see who's coming and going, depending on the length of time. And that would be, as I said before, do they have elderly people? Do they have walkers? Are they all young people?
And if they're all young people, is that a warning sign?
Well, there are additional warning signs. Do they have what we call myth mouth, which is bad teeth? Are they sitting down or kneeling down beside cars in the parking lot? And do they see me and recognize a law enforcement person or a former law enforcement person who's watching them? So if they got up and ran, that's a sign.
Do you look for out-of-state license plates?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I'll give you a specific. In Las Vegas, there were out-of-state license plates all over. Very large pharmacy. People in the room. There were slot machines. They were dozing off. Appeared to, again, with my law enforcement experience, they appeared to be on some kind of narcotic. And when they're selling large amounts of that product to people from out of state, that's a sign.
Council, we've been going about an hour. Should we take a break?
Sure. Why don't we take a break?
We're going off the record at